Welcome everyone. I know this is a busy week, a short week, but as somebody told me yesterday, even when there's only 4 days in the work week, people at the Treasurer's Office still tend to get their 40 hours in. So anyway, including me. So thank you for joining us. Just briefly, since our last call, we've had a couple of press releases, one talking about the renegotiation of our vision and dental contracts for our retirees, and so we're very pleased about the fact that the premiums next year are going to be lower than they are this year, and the premiums 2 years from now are going to be lower than they are this year or next year. So premiums are going down, and that's all locked in, and we appreciate all the people that put in the hard work toward that dental and vision contract. Obviously, the press release, the redacted press release that went out, supposedly I'm known as a humorous person these days, even maybe possibly kind and restrained. So anyway, that went out to talk about the absurdity of us being unable to figure out what we're supposed to pay for health care. So with that, Stephanie, I'll open up for questions.
Okay. Who's got a question for the treasurer?
This is Mark. You want to start? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I'm curious about the redacted contract and the request behind that, which, if I understand correctly, you asked for the contract that UNC has with Blue Cross Blue Shield, right?
I asked for the contract which would point out what we're supposed to pay for these medical services. We send UNC Healthcare nearly $270 million a year as a provider of healthcare services. We are also the insurer for the very people who are responsible for delivering those healthcare services, which are state employees. So the reason I started there, and I'll make my answer short, Mark, is that if anyone should be interested and willing to partner with us to tell us what we're supposed to pay for something, it should be someone within our own family. And as you have seen in the media, and I'll just hold this up for the camera, this is the actual press release. This is the actual response that we got. You know, probably 200 pages of completely blacked out paper.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, so the state health plan has a contract with Blue Cross and Blue Shield, where Blue Cross is supposed to provide, these third-party administrator services, right? To sort of manage the health plan and whatnot. But that contract, the terms of that contract don't actually allow you to see what you're going to pay for individial procedures, for example. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not the lawyer in the room right now, but I would just default back to the fact that I typically don't need a law to tell me what's right and what's wrong. And what's wrong is the fact that there have been numerous findings within the state health plan over the last 15 years. And if you'll just give me a moment, Mark, I'm going to read these to you. The state health plan is at risk, and we can provide these with you, so just you can ingest it without having to write it down. The state health plan is at risk for overpaying medical claims because it does not follow up on potential overpayments which have been identified by its plan auditors. The plan does not attempt to identify root causes of errors or that would result in collecting additional amounts. This is a finding. State health plan is at risk for overpaying medical claims because it does not adequately manage its recovery audit function. A finding. State health plan is at risk for overpaying medical claims because the plan has not taken action to prevent the coordination of benefit errors. A finding. And lastly, the state health plan is at risk for overpaying medical claims because although the plan pays out over $3 billion a year in medical and pharmaceutical benefits, the plan auditors do not have access to the Blue Cross Blue Shield contracts and cannot independently verify that the plan receives proper contractual discounts from its provider network. What's a provider network and what's a proper discount? It's these EOBs that get sent out, which shows supposedly what the proper contractual discount is. And now where do those 4 sentences come from? They come from the Office of State Auditor, authored by Auditor Beth Wood, and the previous one was authored by Auditor Les Merritt. So these are not things that I've just generated since I've been the treasurer. These are findings that I inherited. And I think that we have the responsibility of not just paying the bills that are presented to us, but understanding what we're supposed to pay for these services.
Right. I guess what I'm wondering is, shouldn't Blue Cross and Blue Shield be able to provide you with that information? And if they're not, and the state has a contract with them to provide these services, what do you do then? Do you just sort of say, well, okay, I guess we'll continue to pay to provide these services even though you won't provide us the costs in your network? Or how do you respond to that?
Well, obviously, we're thinking on down the field, but right. I mean, nobody. It's been in no one's best interest to inform or educate the citizens of this state, of which 750,000 of them I have the responsibility for as the state treasurer's office. And I feel some responsibility to the rest of them who are taxpayers like them to tell them what the value and the price is of what they're consuming with health care. And obviously, the president talked about this 3 or 4 weeks ago. There are laws probably on the books, federal laws about these issues. There are state laws on these issues. But the fact is, it's not happening. And as the largest purchaser of health care in this state, I have the fiduciary responsibility, which means loyalty and duty of care, to actually figure this out. What's different about what the president said is that, he is the president of the United States, but we have the opportunity in the state health plan to actually operationalize what he talks about. It's not enough just to say there's a problem. Ultimately, someone has to fix it, and that's what we do.
Well, just one more question on that. So is there? So you redesigned the card. You redesigned the explanation of the EOB statements to make them clearer. You've asked for this information, although you weren't really able to get it from UNC. I mean, what do you do next then to fulfill that fiduciary responsibility to sort of figure it out, as you say?
Well, what I do next is I go back to the findings that have been talked about previously from the state auditor and maybe add a couple of things that I'd like for the state auditor to look at going forward.
Okay.
Hey, Dale, I understand you're absolutely right on what you're saying, but I still don't think you answered Mark's question, is why not get this from Blue Cross?
They refused to give it to us.
Well, then why pick on UNC?
Well, because UNC said we can't give it to you. Blue Cross said we can't give it to you because UNC says we can't give it to you. So it went to UNC.
Oh, I see.
And
okay.
This is one of those games. You're too young, David, to remember those games where you knock down something and it comes back up. You're too young for that. But so it's just been a vortex. We go to one and they say, well, we can't give it to you because of this. And then we go to that one and say, we can't give it to you because of this. Then we go back to the original one and says, if the other person says we can give it to you, is that okay with you? And they said, sure. But then that never happens. It's a vortex.
Yeah. Well, that's really helpful. I mean, I should have been smart enough to figure that out, but I didn't understand what you said. I mean, you can be sure Mark and I have been living that life as long as we've been journalists.
Yeah.
That, that's the way it works. But so it's not new to us, but it's really kind of disappointing to hear.
David, let me be clear. I meant the life of that game, whatever it was back in the 70s, where you knock something down and it pops back up somewhere else.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's the life. I'm not talking about how long you've been doing what you're doing and how well you do it. I'm talking about state.
No. I didn't imply that at all. I'm just trying to understand. It's like it just makes it sound like a clubby arrangement there, and you're trying to break up the club. I mean, I'm trying to understand from you, why do you think there is a clubby arrangement? What's the incentive there for them?
Well, I've said this before, and I think it'll come across well on this call as well as on the video that Brian's doing. This T-shirt that I'm wearing right now, it has a visible winner. And that visible winner is me, because I probably paid less for it than what its true value is. Now, it also, this T-shirt I'm wearing has hundreds, if not thousands, of invisible losers. People who lost their jobs who used to make this T-shirt. And so if you take that and apply it to healthcare, the reason why it's been in no one's best interest to fix this is because of all the people whose interest is in not to fix it are all visible to us. But the invisible people are the state employees and the retirees who I have the fiduciary responsibility to, who are seeing increasing cost of health care and prescription drugs in this state when they are participants in a plan that is the largest purchaser of these products in this state. Now, I was mischaracterized last week by someone who wrote in here and said that I was kind and restrained. So I want both of you to absorb that for just a moment. So, but we've kind of adopted it around the office, and so far it's suited me pretty well. So now I'm going to be kind and restrained. This is where my optimism comes from. We have enough money, we have enough people, we have enough needs for medical services, and we have enough medical providers. We ought to be able to figure this thing out. And we ought to be able to figure it out and lead the nation in solving these problems, because we have the 4 components that it takes to solve something that's this enormous.
The NNO story said it was more than $250 million a year to UNC. Did I hear you say $270 million?
Yeah, it's. I will verify that after the call, but they and Atrium, because I sometimes get that deal mixed up in my head. I think one's at 260 and one's at 280.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a quarter of $1 billion. Yeah.
Are those the 2 biggest?
Yes.
Yeah. And could you share if anybody has provided this kind of detail to you in the past?
No. And you know, we've asked the question of our third-party administrator. You know, well, they said, well, they just weren't in favor of this one with UNC Healthcare, and I said, well, we have contracts with 61,000 providers in North Carolina. 61,000. So UNC Healthcare is one of those. 61,000 providers. I said, well, which one will you share with me of the other 60,999 of them? And they said, well, none. I said, well, am I not asking the right way, or what is, you know? And so they have always considered this to be highly proprietary information. But the fact is that all the non-disclosure agreements and all the things that they present to people who they allow to audit these plans, we'd be more than willing to sign these. We're not interested. We are the most HIPAA compliant and statutory compliant agency around. We're trying to figure out what we're supposed to pay. We know what we're charged, but we're trying to figure out what we're supposed to pay. And you know what? Now that I've said that, that is no different than your readers. They're facing these exact same situations. And this is very different. If you'll allow both of you or all of you on the phone will allow me to digress for a moment. This is very, very different than the pension plan. In the pension plan, you come in and you multiply your years of service times your average yearly pay times your multiplier, and that's it, and that's your pension. So as long as you're breathing, that's what you get, or if you have a benefit, annuitant, survivor. This is so different, because every time somebody consumes health care in this state health plan, you know, 17% of that money in one way, shape, or form is coming out their hip pocket. That doesn't happen in the pension plan. That's what's so different about this situation. So when we set about, as we've been accused of recently of being arbitrary and trying to cut $300 million out of the plan, well, that's about $50 or $60 million in the back pockets of active and retired state employees. But at the end of the day, the question needs to be answered is the question that probably needs to be answered is this: is North Carolina State Health Plan a government payer? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then why should especially UNC Healthcare make 1 penny of profit off a government payer which is owned and run by the same entity that they're owned and run by?
Dale, can I ask you one quick, this is Mark, can I ask you one quick follow-up on that?
Yeah.
Any thought then about, if a big part of the issue here is which in my sense it is Blue Cross doesn't want to give up this information. Blue Cross and its providers sign these kind of mutual non-disclosure agreements as part of their provider agreements, right? So they're not supposed to tell anybody, including you, the one paying the bill, what the prices are. Any thought about the next time Blue Cross's contract comes up, saying to them, we're going to go with someone else if the next contract doesn't include provisions that allows us to see, what we're actually paying for?
Well, I was, when I was sworn in last year, one of the first things of the 100 things that was thrown at me was the fact that the Blue Cross Blue Shield was coming up. And, doing one of these is bigger than turning the USS North Carolina around. It is a lot of work that goes into an RFP of a contract of this magnitude. I mean, we're talking about a health plan that is as large as the domestic employment base of Berkshire Hathaway, Amazon, and JP Morgan. So it's not a small plan. We're talking about a state health plan that last year had 180,000 life-changing events inside the plan over a 12-month period. So if you think about that as vegetables at Harris Teeter, that means the inventory turns once every 4 years statistically. If you think about that, just think about the complexity of that. And then finally, so that contract with the RFP went out. There was a group that got together that I was not involved in, who had a responsibility of scoring this in a way that if the RFP ever got challenged, that there would be evidence of how people came to certain decisions. And the contract was ultimately re-awarded to Blue Cross Blue Shield. But I was very clear. I was the new treasurer. Patrick Conaway was the new president of Blue Cross Blue Shield. I said, this is not a renewing of our vows. This is a resetting of our relationship. And right now it's feeling like we just renewed our vows, and that's it.
When that contract comes up again, and how is it like a 3-year or 5-year, or how long that could on?
3-year contract starting next year. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But contracts can be amended.
One of the comments from UNC was that there's independent audit companies examine this stuff, which I guess, do you see that, or do you have any comfort in that?
Well, when I had a conversation with Blue Cross Blue Shield a few weeks ago, and I asked them what the results of one of those audits were, and were somebody in the room here, I hope will give me a thumbs up. They said the discrepancy was 37 cents. I said
37 cents.
37 cents. And I said, that doesn't even make sense on one claim, much less a sample of claims or all the claims. The fact is, David, and I always think about this in terms of body temperature, but I think 97% of the millions of claims that come through the state health plan are auto-adjudicated. I mean, it's way up there. So my point of saying all that to you, I said, how is that possible when you are talking about billions of dollars worth of expenditures, that you say that on a sample basis, whatever sample that happened to be, that there was a discrepancy of 37 cents? I would have much rather heard, we've scrubbed these numbers and you owe us $37 million, or we owe you $37 million, or something that made more common sense to me than 37 cents. But the fact is that whatever disclosures that those accounting and auditing firms, whatever disclosures that they sign, we have the ability to do the exact same thing here. And why is it, especially where in UNC's case, and when we're the insurer of their employees, and 17% of these expenses are coming off the back pockets of their employees, why would they not tell us what we're supposed to pay? And I'll give this visual to you once again. As you know, I'm from Winston-Salem. I physically live between two major medical centers. I should be able to tell you what a knee replacement costs between Novant, Baptist, High Point Regional, Cone, UNC Healthcare, Duke, Rex, and Wake Met. I should be able to point to where the highest quality, best cost option is for getting a knee replaced. And this is even more evidence recently with an article that was in the Wall Street Journal, 2 of the last 4 weeks. One is, the editorial was, you can't put a price on a hip replacement, and that's the problem. And then there's this very courageous hospital in Wisconsin, I'm doing all this from memory, who allowed some forensic auditors or some folks like that to really follow a person who was getting their knee replaced from the intake to the outtake. Tylenols, Band-Aids, blood transfusions, saw blades, titanium bolts, whatever it takes to make sure a knee replacement is successful. And I think the hospital itself was shocked because they were charging $50,000 for that knee replacement, and they figured out the all-in cost of this, certified in the Wall Street Journal, was $10,500. And when I don't know what I'm supposed to pay, that causes me a big concern when I see example after example after example of this.
Yeah. Well, do you look at this as being a legislative solution next year, or?
Well, no, because I don't think people should need a law to tell them what's right and what's wrong. When we're spending $270 million with an entity, they ought to realize that we're a great partner. On top of that, we're insuring their very employees. Number 2, I think there are already laws on the books that address this, probably federal and state, but I'm not the lawyer. But the fact is, it comes down to the basic premise of consumerism, price and value. And people deserve to know, what I deserve to know as the fiduciary of this plan, what we're supposed to pay. And that's where I'm trying to get at. And sometimes people categorize this of, Folwell's trying to do something about the unfunded health care liability, or this. This is coming off the hip. While we're sitting here on this call, somebody's pulling their personal money out of their pocketbook or their wallet to pay something associated with this thing that I don't know what I'm supposed to be paying for. So this has to do with figuring out what's right, getting it right, and keeping it right on behalf of the citizens of this state.
Well, I think our readership, mostly small businesses, would suggest that they're not getting nearly as good a rate as the SHP. So that the more success you have in this, the better off it would be for the small business community.
Well, and there's this whole issue called cross-subsidization of, whose business is paying for who's the business that's not being paid for. And I don't mean this in an awkward way, but that's not my business. I mean, that should be, how these medical providers choose to run their business is that's what they're paid to do. And the fact is, if they're concerned about the number of people that are inside their facilities that don't have the ability to pay, maybe if everyone was more transparent about what they're supposed to pay, they'd have more people who could pay. I mean, that's the bottom line. And you see these examples recently, these people getting this surprise billing, $200,000, $150,000. Some of these cases, people went in and got a pre-assessment of what their financial risks were going to be, and they paid it all, and then they get these bills for lots and lots of money afterwards. And you know, people are sick and tired of it. And as I've said to you before, David, and maybe even Mark, you know, this is not where I used to work as a blue collar. This is not Honda Winston-Salem. This is not Forsyth Garbage Service. This is not, you know, Young Harley Davidson or the other 48 places I worked as a blue collar person, Coca-Cola Bottling Company. I mean, this is not those, they cannot bend the curve. But as you said correctly, to your point, we have the potential of driving down the cost and increasing the access to health care in this state, and it starts with the largest purchaser of health care. If some of the corporations that advertise or read your magazine or your publications, if they want to get some tailwind off of our best practices, I have absolutely no problem with that, because it comes back, once again, as a person who's kind and restrained, it goes back to the fact that we have enough money, enough providers, enough needs, and enough people. We ought to be able to figure this out in North Carolina. And I'll also remind you that every time that when I was in the legislature, you know, you're doing this for business or you're doing that for business, I want to remind you that the biggest business in this state in every way, shape, or form is the state. The second biggest business in this state are the counties. The third biggest business are the cities. The fourth are the school districts. So anytime that you're reforming any system, everybody wins, not just the businesses, but the biggest businesses of the state, which are governments.
Well, the final question I had is you know, you said you don't see a legislative solution, but you've been a legislature, you know how, you know, that's the way a lot of the world works, and you're bucking, you know, the hospitals, the doctors, the medical equipment providers, none of whom have any incentive to share this data. So, and they also have major, you know, interests in Raleigh. So, you know, how do you change that?
What happens if you pass a law that says they should give us the data, and nothing against the language of Portuguese, but let's say they give it to us in Portuguese? I mean, literally, that's what we're finding. Sometimes we get data that it's just not, and you know, I've had a big technological year personally. I was able to pull up a YouTube the other day by myself, and that was a win. I'm done for the year. I'll just set another goal for next year. Maybe I can get through open enrollment. But anyway, but my point of saying that is that sometimes when we ask for things, we get it in a way that's not portable, not openable, doesn't go into our data warehouse, you know, any way, shape, or form. This is not about writing laws. This is about taking advantage or leading our way out of this situation. And because I've said to both of you, these issues, especially this issue, is going to make the generational difference in the future of our state. Guaranteed.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Mark knows way more about all this than I do, but I'm appreciative of you helping me understand a little bit better. So.
Well, I'll be down there on the 25th, Charlotte.
Cool.
To the Rotary Club, talking about these issues, David. It's a Wednesday.
Great. Uptown Rotary Club on the 25th?
Do they meet on Wednesday at lunch?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So look forward to seeing you at that event, or I'll drop by and see you.
Thank you so much.
Dave, before you hang up.
Take care.
Dave, you hanging up?
No, go ahead.
Okay, just briefly, in case you do, and I'll get back to Mark. I want to read something to you I've never shared with you, of all the props and things I've ever shared with you. The growth in the number of public employees and retirees, runaway medical costs, and the absence of actuarial funding of the retiree medical benefits will soon result in a public sector obligations that will easily dwarf all the other liabilities of the state, as well as the unfunded liabilities of the public provided pension and retirement plans. For North Carolina, the concerns for these major but little understood obligations include, among others, the state's affordability of retiree medical benefits, their design, their historical funding, and the state's right to modify the benefit structure in accordance with its financial capability to fund these obligations in the future. I found this the other day from 1990 from Treasurer Harlan Bowles. So this thing has been percolating for a long time. Mark, Daves, and Charlotte recognized this 28 years ago and started putting money toward these issues. West Salem recognized it 30 years ago and started putting money toward these issues. But we can't solve these issues unless we know what we're supposed to pay. Because if we are unsuccessful, as you are seeing across this country, in states that border North Carolina, Horry County, South Carolina, for example, who is laying off teachers just to make the increased pension and health care contributions as an employer of people. This is going to negatively impact things that people wake up caring about in the mornings, which is how do we educate our kids, have safe streets and form of criminal justice, and how we have good roads and the ports, parks, and all the other core functions of our state government. That's how all this connects, and that's why it's going to make the financial difference in North Carolina's future.